Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another tutorial. In today's video, I'm just going to, I'm going to finally show you how to create HDRIs in Blender by using a mixed method between Blender Eevee and Blender Cycles. Now, what's the point in that? I mean, whoever uses Blender and has used it for quite a while will know that you can use Blender Cycles to render an HDRI Cubemap out of Blender by using a camera with a panoramic setting. Blender Eevee, on the other hand, does not have this function because of how because it's a real-time render compared to Cycles where it's an offline render and it basically can actually do it can bend light in that way that it creates the HDRI. So there is a guy on YouTube. I found him after quite a while. I have found his channel. He's called Hdri Generator. I'm hoping I'm saying that name properly. You should definitely go and check out his channel. I've got a description to his channel in my link. But basically, he shows a method where you can use a 360-degree render out of Blender Cycles, but using render footage from Eevee. So we're going to set that up, and then we're going to create our nice HDRI texture, skybox, whatever you want to call it, and then we'll put it in Unreal Engine, and you'll just see how awesome that looks. So then basically, with the Blender Nebula project that I have provided to you on my ArtStation page or Gumroad page, you can actually go and create HDRIs out of it. Now, there are people out there, there are people on the internet like Tim Barton, which again, I would definitely recommend you go and visit his channel and have a look at the nebulas he's created. They are wonderful, definitely out of this world. And I definitely want to get to that level to create nebulas like he has. But basically, in some of it, in one of his videos, he mentions that a 4K video, I think it was, or an 8K, I can't really remember. He mentions that it took him about 4 months of rendering for a couple of minutes of footage. Now, that is a huge amount of time, and generally people, like myself, do not have that kind of time with one machine to just keep it rendering pretty much throughout the day to get those shots done. So my method that I saw, in conjunction with what Hdri Generator has done on his tutorial, basically renders the Eevee images in a couple of seconds, minutes, whatever, depending on what quality you want to get and what resolution. But then you bring them into Cycles and it's almost an instant render like that. It just takes a few seconds and you've got the shot. You've got that one image. So you can also create videos in this way, right? And then we'll convert that into HDRIs. And then basically, you can do whatever you want from that point onward. So there's so many things in there, but I'm going to show you exactly how to set this up. And also, just because I really want you guys to be able to do this, the Blender Nebula Project, for the first 50 people that go onto the ArtStation page to get it, there's a coupon in there, a limited edition coupon that you can get basically 50 copies of that at 50% off, and I'm talking about paying like less than $2 for it basically. But you get that, and then you've got the Blender project as well, and you can use it in this. So you can actually follow along with me. If not, you can do this with whatever other sort of setup that you've got. You just need a basic Blender scene, really, if you want to test how to get the HDRI done. So without any sort of further ados, let's begin. Just wanted to mention as well that the reception on the project files for my space scenes have been a tremendous success, and I really want to thank you all for all the support you have provided to me and all the feedback that I've been given from the community, and also feedback that I've given back to people that needed my help. A lot of people have joined the Discord channel where we discuss various issues, various topics, and I try and fix some of the problems that they may have, and they also help me as well. There have been people that have helped me, for example, with unlocking 8K textures for HDRIs in Unreal Engine that, it was actually quite a stressful thing for me to sort out, but I managed to get it sorted with the help of the community. And also, if you guys want to buy these space scenes, you can head over to my ArtStation Marketplace or Gumroad. You'll find them all there. There's an Unreal Engine 4 version, Unreal Engine 5 version for all these projects, and any sort of future projects will be added on there. They're also on my Patreon as well, so you can go and subscribe to Patreon and then get the projects. But let's not delay it any longer, and let's begin the tutorial. We're now in Blender, and this is the Nebula project that I've got, which is already set up to be able to do our panoramic rendering. Now what we're going to do, as per usual, we're going to break down the project a little bit so you can learn a few things about it and why it's set up in the way it is. And then we're going to continue with setting up a new, 360, as I like to call it, 360 setup. And again, you can see this on the channel for Cedric Aguilar as well, if you want to see how he set it up. But this is my version for it. Also, I'm going to update the product on ArtStation and on my Gumroad page for it to basically now incorporate the Hdri Generator. So you're gonna have that setup already done. So if you want to get the project from there, you already can start churning out HDRIs from this project. So I'm going to update those projects on the store. Right. So what we've got here is, I like to call this folder is like the camera setup, right? I'm going to do a bit of cleanup before I upload this to my ArtStation page, but we've got the camera setup, and this here is an empty, so it's an object in Blender that you can add, which basically just is like well, in this particular case, it's a cube, but it's an empty, there's nothing, it has no faces or anything like that. And the reason why I'm using this is because this is allowing me to build the camera relay around. What you're basically doing is you're creating a square camera aspect ratio. So you're creating 6 cameras that each look at the face of the cube, of this empty cube, and the center of the cube is like the pivot point from where every camera has got its origin. So every camera is looking in every direction, and when you render out a sequence of images, you're going to render every camera, which I have named like up, right, left, front, down, back. Every camera has a name. Adjacent, the down camera obviously looks down, the left camera looks to whatever I've decided to be the left and the right, and the front and the back. And then you've got one looking up. Now this camera over here is the panoramic camera, which will be used in cycles. So we actually don't need this camera for this part of what we're doing right now. But every camera, as you can see, it's got like an arrow to it. This arrow indicates the top of the camera. So what I've done is, if you look, every camera, so this top of this camera is over here, then the top of the next one, so that would be, if you try and think about these cameras, this is the up, and then you've got the next one, which is this, that's front. So the up, front, then down going that way, and then up, this would be back going upwards. And then you see what I mean? It just created. So if I just look at these cameras alone, you'll see you've got arrow, arrow, arrow. The reason why I've done that is because it allows me to stitch these images easier. So we're going to stitch them into a cube shape after we've rendered every one of them. So I'm just going to show you that in just a minute. So basically, if we deactivate the camera setup in here and we bring the cube, so this is a cube that exists in Eevee. And this particular cube, as you can see, if I change to shaded mode, it contains every one of the renders that I've made previously. So whatever render I've set up, it contains every image. So these images, they actually continue into each other. I don't particularly know. Oh, there we go. I didn't know why it was so shiny. But you can see that this image continues on this image, and this image continues on this. So they're all blending together, essentially. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deactivate this cube, and I'm going to show you that the cameras. So this camera relay is actually, if we with the camera setup on, we've got in here also a nebula setup. So if I bring that up, so if I activate this, this is actually the nebula that I've got within the scene, and you can see it's quite big. So the nebula is quite a big structure. There's actually in this particular case, the nebula is made out of. I don't use this camera, by the way, so I can delete it. But the nebula is made out of 2 cubes, essentially, because I wanted to have more variety within it. And it's moving a bit slow because I'm using volumetrics and they're at a high quality. But this camera setup is inside the cubes, so it's looking in every direction, and volumetrics are building around it. Now, this doesn't mean that this is the only thing that you can do with this. You can have a camera looking at nothing, so you get no texture in that direction, but then you can have another camera who's looking at a smaller shape of a nebula. Like, for example, instead of using a cube, you can use a sphere, or you can use a displaced kind of mesh, so that the volume looks different, and you make it smaller so that it's smaller than what the camera is seeing. So you then have obviously an area that sort of fades away. So that's also very important. So that's the whole idea of this. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to deactivate the camera setup. Let me just go into non-shaded mode, as I don't want my performance to drop down. I'm going to assume that you've got the project, so you've got the cubes and so on. But if you don't, as I said, you can go and just get this. But let's say you don't have any interest in nebulas, you don't want to make that. You can have whatever scene you want. So a scene being even random shapes on a plane, just whatever, any scene that you've got, you can make an HDRI out of it. Okay, so what I'm going to leave the nebula setup as it is because it's not important. That's just the environment, right? We don't need the cube, we don't need any of this. I'm just going to put the cube, I'm going to make sure it's in this collection, which it is, and I'm going to close it, and I'm going to call this master collection. Yeah, so we've got that reference in there, but I'm going to create a new collection over here. Again, as I said, I'm leaving the nebula setup as it is, but then in this collection, I'm going to right click, add a new one, and call that camera tutorial, right? Okay, so within it, with this selected, let me just hide the nebula setup, as we don't need that for now. We only need that at the end when we're rendering. So Shift A, and then I'm going to go to empty and add a cube. So that's our cube, and it's got the origin in the center of the world, and that's pretty much it, right? Now at this point, we can Shift A again and add a new camera. And you can see the camera is just pointing in a random direction. Doesn't really matter. You shouldn't care about that. But instead, press the letter N on your keyboard. Let's just make this smaller as well. And over in here, you've got the rotation of the selected object. So in this particular case, we want to put this to 0. Okay, so now everything on this camera shows 0. Okay, there's nothing else. It's just pointing downwards because of this. Okay, so that's fine. What we can do is we can have the camera selected, then select the empty, and press Ctrl P and just say set parent to object. And now this camera, belongs to this cube. So if you move the cube, the camera moves along with it, which is very useful. Okay, with the camera selected, we can go to its camera settings, and we've got a few options in here for lens. We need to change that to panoramic, although panoramic doesn't actually work in Eevee, it doesn't matter, just make sure to put it as panoramic. Then the focal length, change this to field of view, and I like to go to 106 degrees. Some people may say, why don't you use 90 degrees? That's fine, but then if I have a larger field of view, I can scale down the UVs of the cube that I'm going to project all these textures on. And what that means is I've got some space to move around and make sure that I get my textures to match up. I mean, just bear in mind that once you finish the process of rendering and getting it out of cycles, you will most likely have to sort out some of the areas where the cube is meeting. Now, if you have a solution for how I can bypass this sort of stitching operation that I normally do in Photoshop, please let me know, because so far the seams are quite visible, and I'll tell you why there are seams. They're not seams because I couldn't align the textures properly. There are seams because lighting. So if I have multiple points of light within the nebula, each of them will have obviously their light being dispersed within the scene, but each camera sort of sees it a bit different, which has really pissed me off. But unfortunately, I don't know how to get around that as of yet, unless you manually edit the final image. But we'll get to that, and hopefully somebody will come with an idea. So we've got this camera. It's 106, that's great. And nothing else in here needs to be changed apart from passepartout, whatever it's called. Just put that over to 100%, meaning that the camera will not see anything so sorry, nothing will be displayed. So if we go in here, you know, just turn on this, and let's make sure, so this camera, I can't actually, well, unfortunately, I can't actually possess that one for now, and this is because of the setup that I've got down here, which we'll get to in a second. But basically, everything around the camera frame will become black, and just whatever the camera is seeing as the only thing you can see, which is great. Okay, so another thing, we can go over here into the render settings, into the resolution and so on. I'm just going to put that to 496 by 496, which is a square image. And then the format you want to render as, I'm going to leave it as PNG and with an alpha, because you may want your nebula to have alpha within it, so there's nothing behind it, so to speak, like you can actually see through it. But that's, you know, that's really your choice if you want to do that or not. You know, so I'm just going to leave it as RGBA. I'm just going to change this folder because I have created a new one, which is just for the tutorial, and press accept. Now, the camera is pretty much set up. Let's just rename this to down, because this is actually looking down. And then I'm going to Control C, Control V, which, sorry about that. It seems that because it's paired, it's actually, because it was paired, it actually duplicated the empty as well. And it seems it does it no matter what. So let's just press Alt P on the keyboard with the camera selected and just say clear and keep transformation, so we can pair the cameras after we created all of them, instead of just, you know, getting this empty to copy as well at the same time. So now we can Control C, Control V on the camera, and this camera, we've got to decide where it's going to be looking at. So in this particular case, you know, you can have a look. So by just changing these values, you can see where the camera is going to be looking at. In my case, I am going to move it to 180 degrees. Okay, so that's put it looking up, which is great. I am then going to call it up. Then the same sort of camera, I can Control C, Control V, and then I can continue with the 180. Sorry, I need to make sure that it's actually selected, and I can continue with 180 to go to basically 200 and whatever it is. 1 second. What I like to do is do that. So rotate it on an axis and keep Control press, and then it just rotates. It's snapping. So then you can snap it straight like that at 270, and now it's pointing that way. And as you can see, the arrows are actually pointing as well. Like I told you, create like this this sort of rotation. So we've got it like that, and then we're gonna call that back, for example. Okay, and now we can Control C, Control V again, rotate, and all the way here, and that's going to be called front. By the way, you may want to select all of these cameras and press Control A, and then press all transform. So they just sort of all transforms have now been reset. So that, I think that's important as well, just to have that done. So now we've got a back, a front, up, down, but we don't have a left and right, so that's simple. We obviously can just take one of these and then just rotate like that, which is great. And then we can call this sorry, what did I just do? Sorry, I didn't actually copy it, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, that's copied, and we can call this left, and then Control C, Control V to copy again, go all the way on the other end and call that right. Okay, and now we've got 6 cameras, and we take all of these 6, which by the way have the same property as the first one that we created, and then we select the empty last, and then just parent, and everything is now parented to the empty, which is what we wanted. Okay, now you're seeing that I've got this timeline over here. Now this timeline is set to timeline, so not dope sheet, graph, or anything like that. Just I've got a timeline over there. Now I'm gonna go to frame number 7, and I'm going to say start my rendering from number 7 and go by go to 13, for example. So, well, actually not 13. You want to go to 12. So then you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 camera possibilities. And oh, actually no, you do want to go to 13. You may want to go to 13 when you get the panoramic camera in as well. So you see, this is my setup in here. So over at number 7, you can press M on the keyboard, which then adds a marker. And then you can right click, you can go to the marker and then just say you got this bind camera to markers. Now this is important. You've got to make sure that you've got the camera selected, the one that you want to bind. So if I want to make the back camera to be my first one, I can go to the marker and then I've got in here bind camera to marker, and you can see it's now binded the back camera to the 7th frame. So then I go to the 8th frame and press M again, and I select my next camera. And I think it was Control Shift B. No, sorry, what was it? It was Control B, simple Control B. So just make sure you're hovering over this timeline before you do that. I'm gonna go to 9, add a new marker, select the front camera, Control B, go to 10, left. Okay, then go to 11, add a marker, Control B. I'm sure there probably is a faster way of doing this, but you know, there you go. So now I've got all 6 cameras in here, and what happens is when you press render animation, it will render every one of these cameras one by one, and our sort of setup will name it as camera 007, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And you can see what each of them will mean, because 7 is then back, and then down, front, left, right, and up, right? Okay, so we've done all of that. That's amazing. If we bring the Nebula setup in view, okay, you can see it's also transparent, but that's because I've set it up in my over here in the film option. You can deactivate transparent, and then it will just add whatever the world shader material is. So if you go into the shader editor and then switch over to the world, this is what I've got as a shader, and this is what it will sort of add in the blanks if you don't want it to be transparent. Transparent meaning that you get that alpha that I talked about earlier. But we're just going to leave it as transparent for now. Let's just go back to the 3D viewport, and this is obviously the volumes from the Nebula. I'm just going to deactivate, hide in viewport. They will render, but they will just be hidden. Actually, no, because I wanted to show you something. So if I change the camera, you can see it's also changing it in here. So these are all the scenes, these are all the images that I'm going to be generating. Awesome, isn't it? Right. Let's just deactivate the Nebula setup. We've got the camera setup done. We do want to add another camera, and I'm just going to go over Shift A and just add a new camera. And this particular camera, in its settings, again, we're going to change to panoramic. You want to make sure it's pointing into a direction, and in this particular case, I'm just going to make sure it points out maybe in that direction, but you can change it. Now it's still square, but that you will change that at the end when you want a different resolution for your cycles. But panoramic, field of view, and then put that at 90. But when you change it to cycles, these settings will change, by the way, so this is not permanent. Okay, now this particular camera, we're going to call it panoramic, and this camera will not render yet because we need to actually add it to a frame, which is frame 13. Going to add it, so I've done that, but I'm going to limit my frames to 12 only because that's the only thing that I want to render to begin with. Okay, that's done. And in the camera tutorial, we can now Shift A and add a mesh. Add a cube. This cube, you leave it as big as you see it here. Like, there's no point in making it larger than this, at least for now. But you do want to add materials. So what I do suggest to you is you add a new material, and then you name that material to back. So that's going to be, but what you've also got to understand is we deactivate every one of these cameras from here. We hide them. Let's go Alt Z to see through. hide the panoramic as well, we don't need it. So when you bring the back camera in, we can see which is the back camera. So this is looking this way. With the cube selected, you go into edit mode, you click in face mode, you just click this face, so the one that the camera is looking at, and then you've got this option here to assign. So I've now assigned that material to that face only, okay? Now we can add a new material, press new, and then this, we'll call it down, okay? And this down material, you can close off the back camera and bring the down camera. Obviously we knew which was going to be the down, but it's important that you sort of do this. Now what I'm going to do, because you obviously get the gist of it, I'm also going to show you another thing. Go out of edit mode, let's make this a bit bigger and go into our shader editor. Now we've got, for every one of these materials, it's a sort of common setup. Now we want to keep the principal BSDF in this. We then want to add an emission as well. And the reason why you want to keep the BSDF is if you want to do it with an alpha. If you don't, then this is not important. But if you do, then you might as well. So then add a shader and connect both the emission and the BSDF in here. Again, your texture will go into the emission, but if you want to create alphas as well, then you can use the alpha from the BSDF. But all of this connects into the surface of the material output. So I'll just save that just so we have it. Okay, but the reason why I've done that now is because I want to, sort of copy the same sort of setup for every one of these materials that I'm going to do. So, I just Control C, go to down, delete that, add it in, and then connect these two together. So now down has the same sort of setup, and the textures will be adding in once we've rendered. So I'm just going to create all the materials for every camera, and then we're just going to come back to continue the video. So we now want to start rendering. One thing though, I have done some tests, and I think for an easier sort of time with creating this, we're going to take it down to 90 degrees, the field of view on every camera. So I'm just going to make sure that I change that for, as I said, every camera. We got to make sure that every camera is at 90 degrees. Okay, make sure every one of them is panoramic and 90 degrees. So that's fine. Now, in the render setup in here, we want to change this to 25% because we want to test out how the render is going to look like. Because we're on frame number 7, and that's the back camera, I can then press F12 on the keyboard, and this should render, well, it's render nothing really. Let's just bring in the, get out of edit mode and just bring the render output. Actually, I can leave this as it is, but I'm going to change the shader editor to a 3D viewport. And the reason why this looks like this is because we haven't yet added the textures that, we haven't yet rendered the nebula. So we need to bring the nebula setup in, and that's it, that these are just these volumes. And if we press, if we press this button over here into render mode, you can see the nebulas, but the cameras are still not really seeing anything, and that's because this cube is blocking the way. So just make sure you've got nothing blocking the way of the nebulas. Now you can see that the nebulas are far beyond the camera setup that we've got in there. One thing to note is that in the over here into these options, turn off ambient occlusion, because you definitely don't want you don't want shadow differences or anything like that between the cameras. And then the volumetric options are where you're going to mostly, get your sort of effect from. So you want to definitely set this tile size to 2 pixels, and then just have a look. This start and end for the volumetric is very important, because if you move this to 1 meter, you can see that the entire thing has changed, because volumes are now getting closer to the camera as before. But if we move it to 5 meters, then basically it's clipping away at 5 meters. You can even put it at 10 meters, and you can see that's got quite a nasty effect on it. Again, you've got over here some samples for shadows, samples for the volumetrics. The higher the numbers, the greater the better the effect. But don't increase it too much because you might end up having some really nasty sort of looking effects. Now, I'm just going to try maybe do it like a 3 or maybe a 2. No, maybe a 4. I'm going to try a 4. Now, if I change for the cameras, you can see that it's also changing what the setup is seeing, right? So all of that changes according to me changing to the next cameras. So that's what's going to render out if we press render animation. If we just press render image, then this is just going to render the camera that we were on when we press render image. And that's the nebula that we're getting. And the quality on it isn't amazing because we're just using a 25% resolution out of the 4K that we try to get it at. I would definitely suggest to you that you do 8Ks maybe, because what you're doing then, you're creating square renders at 8K. Then you're going to put in an HDRI overall texture that's going to contain multiple 4K or 8K textures inside, but they're down sampled. So they're going to retain much of their quality, but obviously at a smaller scale. But that's what it's going to look like. We can then render the animation. I've got it in this tutorial. So if I press render animation, then every one of the those camera setups will render in here, and then will be saved automatically in here. And that's my, that's the first image. So it's tagged as 0007 because it was on frame 0007. So now this is the second one, 008, and so on. Each of these will have some form of connectivity between them. So these images, when we add them to our cube, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. So I'm just waiting for the 6th render in here to come in, and that's it. That's the final sort of image. So I can close this and I can go back into normal view. I can deactivate the nebula setup as I don't want to. The reason why I'm rendering at 25% is because I want to move quickly through this. Okay, and this particular thing I can change it to a shader editor. This cube is something that I created earlier, but it's not, if you go in here, it's the cube with the materials that we created earlier. So this cube, we now need to select the back camera, the back face. So if we go into edit mode, we select the back face and then press select. You can see that this is the back face. If we change this to a render view, so we can see the textures when we're adding them, I can now bring the first image and link that to the emission, and you can see it's been added over here. I can then select, the down, and I've deactivated this option, but there's the face selected, and I can bring the next texture in. So I'm going to bring this. What I would suggest is, before you continue bringing any more textures, you now look to see if they're matching up together. So what I mean by this is, you can switch over into the UV editor. One thing about the cube, that it's already done here, but the cube, if I create a new cube in the scene, so mesh cube, let's just bring it out here. If I go into edit mode on this and we have a look at the UVs, what you're seeing is like a cross type shape for the UVs. What you want to do instead is you want to select every one of these faces, press U and unwrap, and do that for every one of them. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to use the maximum resolution. Plus, it wouldn't look correct anyway. So you want to use the maximum resolution of your textures. So we've got the cube like that, and then you can scale them up or down, all of them at once, all the faces at once. Inside here, just make sure you've got this button pressed so you can see the faces properly. And we're going to rotate in here to make sure that the textures are aligning properly with each other. So now I will delete this cube as I don't need it, and I'm just going to go back to my original cube. Now with all of the meshes selected, let's just increase them to the size of them, being as well, to the point where you can see the seam, right? That's the seam over there. What we want to do now is we want to scale. So we want to scale until they sort of meet in there like that. okay? But are they matching? That's a very important question. Is the texture from up here blending into the texture from down here? So we can select this face, right? And we can rotate over in the UV map by pressing R on the keyboard and holding Control. We can rotate this in, while snapping until we match it up, just like a jigsaw sort of puzzle, right? We need to match it up with the texture above it. So this is easier said than done. I know that. And what you're noticing is that it's not really properly matching, which is quite, which is a bit unsettling, I would say. Let me just rotate again, just try and find, the point where it most looks like it would be. So that's not working. That's not working. There could be, there could be some explanations here. If we look at the camera relay, so let's just look at the camera relay to see how the texture would follow. So I've gone ahead with adding all the textures to each face, individual face, as we've set them up on the material. But what I've come to realize is that our camera setup is not properly done. And this is due to the angles. So I'm just going to select the back camera, which is looking to be all right. I'm then going to select the front camera, okay? And if I look over into the view option in here, into the item option, but just make sure you've got the camera selected and you can see it's sort of how it's rotated. And we want to bring that, we want to leave it at 90 degrees, that's fine. But then we want to rotate it to 180 degrees. So it's facing upwards. And then we want to select, so we've got the back done, we've got the front done, then the left as well. So we can put this to 0, which would then be facing upwards. And then we've got this camera over here, the right camera, and rotate this as well so it faces upwards. Just make sure it's 0. This 270 here is not right, so set this over to 0 and then just bring it down like that by rotating it on the side to minus 90 degrees. And this should give us, a nice array there. Now the down and the up cameras can be at these degrees. So the down camera can be at 0 degrees, while the up camera can be on 180 degrees on the x-axis. And this should be a better setup for our cameras, and hopefully this will help with stitching the textures together properly. So I'm going to activate the nebula again, and I'm going to press render animation, and this should now bring up, redo the textures, because as I've said to you, I believe they just were, the camera angles were not going to help us with stitching them together. They were just too randomized and too difficult to work out where each camera will be. But then they should sort of put themselves together on the cube automatically. They will automatically place themselves on the cube as the render finishes, because Blender obviously pulls its textures from a disk location. You can bake those within the program if you want to, within the project, but with, for this particular thing, they're not baked in. Now we can hide the nebula and bring back the cube and go into render mode. And you can see that these faces, so just go into edit mode on the cube, and you can see that these two faces are already properly aligned, which is great. Over in here you can see a proper alignment, but then it's very odd that there is no alignment on this segment over here. But let me just have a look. So this continues properly. It's sort of links okay here. These are connected properly. I'm just trying to find what is the common texture that just doesn't seem to align with anything else. So in this particular case, it's the back that doesn't seem to be aligning with any other texture. And then we can see that it's also the front. So the back and the front textures aren't actually aligning with anything else. If you follow all the other textures, you can see that this one is blending, this one is blending, this one is blending as well, and then over here, down here, they blend. So what is making the front and the bottom not to blend? You know, that's an important question. So if we try and rotate them, you know, we're still not going to get a blend. If we try to rotate them even again, we're still not getting that blend. Try and rotate them again, and we're still not getting that blend. What potentially could be the issue? Okay, let's just have a look into the shader editor. We can look at the back texture, which is 007 as per our instruction, and then the front is 009 again as per our instruction. The textures are matching up. If we then look at the camera relay, so how do we set up the cameras in here? The back and the front, this is how they're sort of set up. So it's for the textures that are going, you know, the textures that are left, right, up and down. Sorry, left, right, up and down. These textures seem to be all right. But when it comes to the front and back, something is happening that is, you know, stopping them from looking properly the way they should. So I've realized as I was putting together the cube and the cameras and everything else that it's very confusing when you're working with such a difficult subject matter like a nebula. It's very difficult, especially when you have colors that look a bit different on one face to the other. So then you don't really know 100%, are they really matching? You know, some people will find this out very quickly, others don't. Others won't. So I've come up with a better system of setting up your scene, your 360 scene, without actually rendering the nebula first. So what I mean by this, I have created what I like to call a cube solver. Now if we bring that in, what you're seeing here is I've added 6 cubes, right? And each of them are overlapping. So for example, this one, this camera sees this cube and sees, just sees that cube in particular. But then this camera will see 3 cubes. We'll see the blue one, the pink one, and the green one. Anyway, the point of the matter is that if I now deactivate this cube, and I've only got my camera relays in here, okay? If I press render animation, what you're noticing right now is that, it seems I've forgot to deactivate the nebula, so I don't want the nebula to render as well. I just want to render these cubes, right? So pressing the render animation, it will render all of the cubes. And this is fine because it's obviously doing the same render as before. Once all those renders are done, you can then switch back to shader editor in here. Deactivate the cubes, so you don't want to see the cubes anymore, and just bring back that cube that we're projecting all the textures on. And if we have a look, you can see that still the Eevee, the nebula textures are loaded, but the textures in the folders have changed. If you had the Node Wrangler add-on installed, which you can do in any Blender version, you just go search for it in add-ons and activate it. You can see it over here, Node Wrangler add-on. Pressing N on the keyboard brings it in where you're in the shader editor. So on the first material, select the material and then reload image, and that has now loaded the cubes in there. Just make sure you do this every time you re-render your images, otherwise you won't see the changes unless you restart the program. So now I've got all the cubes in place, and what are you seeing with my solver with this method that I've done with the cubes, although they're properly aligned right now, they weren't prior to me putting the solver in, the cube solver as I like to call it. That's coin, by the way. That's now coin. That's me inventing that. Right, so without that, all of these cubes were basically random. So what I mean by this is, you know, if we go into edit mode, this, for example, this face would have been this way. So you could clearly see that it wasn't matching up. But now, with the cubes, you can easily turn them around and make sure that they all match up. And you can see that because of this overlap, they're all matching up. That's how your texture will match up as well. So if we deactivate this cube and then go back into bringing a nebula in, okay, so we've got the nebula back in, we can now press render animation again with everything else deactivated. Every image from the nebula will spawn. And by the way, this cube solver pretty much kind of negates the prior sort of steps a bit with the camera angles, but I would still advise you to do that, just because you want to have proper camera angles. You gotta make sure that they're properly set up and there's no errors in there in between. I don't want you to take any risk and then not know what's going on and how to troubleshoot, so better be safe than sorry. But we've now rendered all of the images, as you can see, and I'm just going to bring back the cube, my trusty cube. Gonna deactivate the nebula. With the cube selected, go into shader editor, pick every material, reload images just like you did before. I don't think there's a reload images for all of them, but that would be quite nice if there were. Anyway, reloading all the images in, and that syncs. Okay, oh, seems I've not reloaded one image. I'm not really sure which one. There we go. Okay, so everything now is as it should be. Every part of the cube is now, well, sort of seamless, put together. Okay, so we've got that done. We've got the textures. It's now time to move to the next step. The next step is to bring our panoramic camera in, and we want to move to frame 13 and make sure that we are rendering only 13 to 13. Then we can go into our render setup in here and do 4096 times 2. So try and go for a 21:1 aspect ratio. This is, I believe this is 21:1, but if it's not, then, you know, just whatever you want to do. But I would say you could do that. Okay, switch the render engine to cycles, and with the panoramic camera selected, you can switch over to the 3D viewport here, and this is what you're seeing. Select the cube, go into over here into this into the object properties, go to visibility and deactivate all the ray visibility and just keep the camera on only. Okay, this will help us have incredible fast render times. Now, with the camera selected, go to the options for it. Make sure it's panoramic, and then switch this to equi-rectangular. And if I make this bigger, you can see what's happening, right? This is basically what's happening, and that's the sort of effect that we're getting. Those are the seams that will be visible due to, you know, as I said, due to lighting differences. So you could, however, this is why I wanted to render at 106 degrees, but you can do that. You can still do that. It's not really a problem. I'm just going to open here a UV editor, and I'm editing the cube, and I'm scaling it. So select all faces, and I can scale it up and down. But as you can see, it's not really fixing that issue. If you had at 106 degrees, you may have a slight chance of fixing this, but this way, not so much. So this is the image, and this is what I need, you know, I need some help with. If you guys know of a way of eliminating these, the only way I know of is go in Photoshop. Okay, so we can now get a render out of this. We've got the camera set up, so the panoramic camera set up. We've got our sizes, our, you know, everything. We can turn this on so we can see just what the camera sees as well. Go to the render options, and over in here make sure your samples, you can set these to 2, so it renders instantly, or higher samples if you're going to use alphas. So I'm just going to put it at 2 because we're not really using any alphas. In terms of performance, you can even change the tile size to 2048 or higher, so it does bigger tiles. Make sure it's GPU bound, so you're actually rendering with the GPU. Volumes, you can play around. There's no, well, sorry, the volumes has no effect in this because we're just rendering an image, really. So that's pretty much done. You know, it's ready to go. But just a format, so you can either export as PNG. If you want to get an alpha out of this, then I definitely advise you to go for PNG format. But to use it as an HDRI in Unreal Engine, you will need to export as HDRI or convert that PNG into an HDRI, which I can show you how to do that as well. But we're going to do it as PNG, no compression. The render will be at 100%. Again, I know we're using low resolution on our smaller textures, but that's fine. This is just for demonstration purposes. So render image, and yeah, that's how fast it is. Basically, it's done now. This is the render, but again, it's low quality because our tiles are low quality. Okay, now these are the seams, and they're very visible when it comes to lights. Lights is what's causing most of these seams to be visible. So you could take this image, you know, you could save it. I don't know why I need to actually exit the render and then view render again to be able to save it. So you could save, save as, go in tutorial. You know, you can select in here how you want. You can even save it as a Radiance HDR right now, but again, it won't save with the ability to have any alphas. So I'm just gonna call this render tutorial, okay? And I'm just gonna save the image, and now that's done. Now on a website called Convertio, you can actually bring that file. So this render, you can drag and drop it here, and you've got a convert option. It will say that the file is too large, so you need to pay some money. So when you actually export it, you see it's 192 megabytes. You're just gonna have to work with conversions and you know, make it smaller. So right now it's just massive in terms of space, but you know, you could take this into Photoshop or whatever to decrease that size of it. But let me just show you with the setup I've already got available. So there's no point in me doing the conversion, making the image smaller. That's something that you can easily do. This is one of the original ones that I've done a couple of days ago, just for demonstration purposes. I believe this was the one. Let me just see. Yeah, so you can see these are all the seams from this image, right? You can see the seams over there. So what I've done is I've then edited the image. You see that? And I've edited it in Photoshop, so the seams are gone. This is an 8K, rendered at 8K, so you can see there's far more detail in there. And I've basically edited it using the healing brush, but it won't allow you to do it. Well, you've got to first decide where you're going to take it, but it's going to say that it can't do it on a 32-bit channel. So what that means is you've got to go to image mode and switch to 8-bit channel. And then this pop-up will come over. Just make sure you select exposure and gamma and press OK. That will keep your settings the same. And then you can just go with a healing brush on every one of these edges and start fixing them with your pen, obviously not by hand. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do it by hand if you want to. So the healing brush or the stamp brush, they both would do kind of the same work, but then you're going to get rid of all of this stuff. So, you know, I just made a huge brush here and I'm just editing. You can see it just takes that out. But if you're trying to do this for a video, this could get really nasty really fast. So this is why we need solutions, people. Come up with solutions, please. Okay, so that's done. That's the render. So the final output image, as I said, it was this. I've converted it with Convertio, because you can see it's quite small. I've converted it into an HDR, which just takes it up to about 70 megabytes. And then this is the same HDR that you're seeing, that you just saw, and this is in Unreal Engine, okay? Now, in Unreal Engine, I want to point out something very important. If you got my previous project file, or if you watched my tutorial, then you already know how to set up this material for the skybox. So please watch that video. Watch that video on how to set up this material for the skybox. Okay, but I'm not here to talk about that. You can watch the tutorial or download the project file and you can get the skybox directly. I'm here to talk about the material itself. So in this particular case, this is the texture. Okay, and also I've got an alpha for it. This is the alpha that I've used. The way I generate an alpha is I go in Photoshop and make it black and white and then invert the colors if I want, depending on what effect I want to get. I wanted to have some really bright lights in the scene, and you can see that because that's how the alpha sort of allows them to pass through as well. But let me just go back to the material. This texture, you can see that it's imported at 8K by 4K texture, and it's displayed like that. Okay, and it's max in game, it keeps it at 4K. Now, one very important thing is over here, you've got it's gonna be at from texture average. That's what it's gonna be set up at. And what you're gonna see now, the moment I've done that, is that the resolution of the texture will go down, will drop significantly, and especially will drop significantly because your maximum texture number over here is most likely going to be 0 when you bring any texture in. But this particularly applies to HDR, to Cubemap textures, and not to normal textures. So normal textures aren't necessarily affected by this, but it might be worth checking out. But for HDR textures, what happens is they're actually limited to like 1K to be displayed rather than 4K or 8K, which is very, very concerning. I did not know that, and I didn't know what was happening. I actually spent hours trying to find a solution for this. I'm just waiting for this to compute. I don't know why it's taking so long, but once it finishes computing, what you'll see is a quite a big decrease in quality. Let me just put this to 0 as well, since we're you know, it's waiting for textures to be ready apparently. That's very unfortunate for me. But I'll just skip to the end, you know, basically I'll just skip the video to the point where it's taking it back to 0. So it's done it now. We're at maximum texture of 0 and from texture group, and what you're looking at is an incredibly blurry texture, and it's just, this is an 8K texture, but it's displayed at 1K. And then if you look here, that's how bad it looks like. It's horrendous, right? And this could happen when you actually bring in these HDRIs. So what we're gonna do is, the first thing you want to do is change to no bitmaps, and you can already see that it will sharpen up, okay? But the display is still very low, so your resolution of this image is still quite low. If we go back into the world, you can see it. It's better. It's definitely better, but nowhere near to the quality that it should be. So the moment we then look at the maximum texture and we set that to 16384 or 8K, what you'll notice now is that these settings will now increase to their proper value. And that is how this texture needs to look like, okay? And this is, you know, this is a really nice texture, but you know, some of the settings in here. So for example, we could put the power to 1, which then just brightens it a lot. This is at its normal quality, normal color peak. But then we could, you know, decrease the colors, or make, you know, increase them by quite a lot. Or you can set the power to 3, which then decreases that. So you can see that now it's just only the brightest of areas are still going to be visible, like that red tint down there and where the sun is right now. But again, you know, I would leave it to a power of 2 for my particular purposes. But this is a skybox literally generated from that nebula that you just saw in Blender, and this is the quality that we're getting with it. This is why I want to use HDR maps, you know, HDR cube maps, rather than just a plain sphere that's just sort of have a texture, you know, attached to it. But yeah, that's pretty much the effect that we're getting, and this is the scene. I think it looks quite nice. And, you know, you could, for example, you could select the star system and rotate it if you want to rotate the nebula. If we find a solution in how to make this into properly fix those seams when we export them out of Blender and make a video render, then we can have a nebula that's basically moving in space, but not as an HDR, but instead as a video file. But I do hope you guys found this tutorial useful. Please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to my channel if you did. I think this is a very nice way of doing things. I hope I've shown you guys quite a lot. There's been quite a few things that I've learned, along the way, and some things that I'm sure you guys have learned. I'm really thankful to my Patreons. You can see their names on the screen. I'm really thankful to my Patreons for supporting me. That's actually going up now. More support for Patreons. So really love that commitment there from people. And going forward, the content that I'm working on now is how to make stars and how to make some really fantastic looking space scenes, and I can't wait to share them with you guys once they're done. I'm also working on volumetrics in space, so we can have like clouds, volumetric with thunderstorms inside of them. So I'm going to bring that soon as well. So please follow me. Join the Discord chat if you want to discuss further, if you have any feedback, if you want to learn a few, some other things or ask some questions. I'm always open to talk to you guys. I hope you'll have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.